And we're live on the Stables Network.
Good afternoon. Welcome to ATL Prime Sports Post NFL Draft Edition, brought to you by the Association of Professional Ball Players of America. I'm Todd Corder. Chris Pirtle's with me today. He's the host of the Sports Junkies out on WAXE 107.9 FM and 1370 AM. And beautiful, as Chris would say, Vero Beach, Florida, and I can't argue with him on that. Chris also covers the NBA for the NBA Insider. Chris, welcome to ATL Prime Sports. I'm really glad to have you today.
Well, hey, Todd, it's good to be with you. I appreciate you having me on today.
Now, I would say it was a great draft, and let's get started. We'll get right into it. You know, this was the biggest take from me. The Packers drafting Utah State quarterback Jordan Love in round 20 instead of getting Aaron Rodgers, helping wide receiver. I just, your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, this draft, a lot of surprises, and that's definitely one that could be right up there at the top. You know, Todd, I've labeled this draft after I got a chance to sit back and review and digest and put it to bed. I have officially wrapped this draft up and labeled it the Kansas City effect. You know, we saw 3 quarterbacks go in the first 6 picks. We saw 6 wide receivers get drafted in the first round this season, or this year, I should say. Last year, there were only 2 taken in the first round. We saw a total of 4 quarterbacks taken, and as you mentioned, Jordan Love, the surprise of them all, maybe not necessarily being drafted in the first round, but who he was drafted by is most definitely a surprise. We saw 5 offensive tackles taken in the top 18 picks. So if you think you do indeed have that franchise quarterback like a Patrick Mahomes or a Tom Brady, you definitely want to protect them. So I think we saw the Kansas City effect throughout the first round and throughout the draft, for that matter. It was interesting. There was only 1 running back taken in the first round, and he was taken by the Kansas City Chiefs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire off to Kansas City. That makes 2 years in a row the Chiefs have drafted a player from the SEC with a first-round pick, which, as you would probably agree, Todd, that's probably not a bad idea.
I think it's a fantastic idea. And, you know, I like it. I like the Kansas City effect. The NFL is a huge copycat league. And, you know, everybody's trying to compare this to the time when Brett Favre was, you know, when Aaron Rodgers was drafted, and Brett Favre was, you know, the age, the wherewithal, where at the draft, and et cetera. And, you know, when I think about the Packers, Chris, I don't really think this is the Brett Favre comparisons at all, because Brett Favre was talking about retirement then. Aaron Rodgers is not. He's talking about playing 5 more years. And to me, this puzzled me, because if you picked wide receivers, you know, this Green Bay team went all the way to the NFC Championship game, and they're 1 game away from the Super Bowl. Why wouldn't you go ahead and draft that, keep building around him, and get Jordan Love later? Because Brett Favre has no intentions of moving his spot.
Yeah, it makes no sense, Todd. I mean, this is a team, as you said, 1 game away from the Super Bowl, possibly just playoff, you know, home field advantage away from the Super Bowl. If they would have been able to host that game, who knows how it would have turned out in the NFC title game in Green Bay. So a team that went 14-4 overall, including the playoffs, how do they not go out and address a need that they really need, which was wide receiver? So it makes no sense to me. This is the first offensive player that the Green Bay Packers have drafted since they drafted Aaron Rodgers, which was about 14 or 15 years ago. And when they finally do draft an offensive player, they draft a quarterback. So it makes no sense. You know, I wish my team was 13-3 last year. I wish we had those kind of problems. But if we did, I don't think we'd be taking a quarterback. So it makes no sense at all. It didn't make any sense the day after it happened. And even days later now, Todd, as I've had time to think about this, it probably makes less sense than it did the day after the draft.
It is the true Kansas City Chiefs effect. I'm going to steal that tomorrow night on the show. I love it. Let's go ahead and continue with the quarterback theme. between Tua, Joe Burrow, and Justin Herbert, who is going into the best situation to A, play right away, and B, be very successful?
Well, I'm going to start with the number one pick in the draft, but I've got to say something, as you talked about at the top of the show, Todd. It is a copycat league because this time last year we were coming off and we're going into an NFL draft where the Super Bowl champion only given up 3 points in the Super Bowl, that being the New England Patriots in the 2019 Super Bowl. So we saw a lot of defensive players drafted in last year's first round. Now, chances are there just happened to be timing where there's a lot of good defensive players available. This year there was probably a lot of good offensive players available, but you better believe the previous world champion does have something to do with it and does certainly influence people's decisions when they do make first-round picks. In terms of who has the best setup as far as these three quarterbacks, to start immediately and start playing immediately, I think you have to look at Justin Herbert. There's not much there at quarterback right now. When you look out to Los Angeles and you see the quarterbacks they have on that roster, Tyrod Taylor would be the starter if you had to name one today. So that's obviously very up in the air if it's Tyrod Taylor. You go to Cincinnati, Andy Dalton is still on the franchise there. Chances are he won't be by the time they play the first week of the season, but right now he still is. So that you've got to say immediately that's not going to be a quick start for Joe Burrow, but that can change, and I think it will, and that's why I think Joe Burrow is in the very best situation, Todd. He's going to go to a team that last year their first-round pick didn't even play, so they're essentially getting 2 first-round players to join the team this season. They're going to bring back A.J. Green. You're in Atlanta. You know exactly who A.J. Green is and what he can do, and so do the folks in Cincinnati and anybody that's a real NFL fan. Bringing back A.J. Green is like bringing back one of the top 10 receivers in the league as long as he's still healthy, and there's no reason to think that he's not. So I think the Cincinnati situation is not that bad. I know a lot of people trash the organization. They say negative things about it. They say negative things about Mike Brown. It is true they haven't won a playoff game in 30 seasons. But however, in Andy Dalton's first 5 years on the job in Cincinnati, his first 5 years, which is incredible, he took the Bengals to the playoffs all five times. He took the Bengals to the playoffs a total of 7 times. So the Bengals organization, I don't think as bad as some people make it out to be. And I think Joe Burrow is in the best situation to succeed. And to succeed, I can't say immediately because I don't think they're going to have a good season this first year. But the second or third season, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Bengals contending for division championships.
That's interesting that you mentioned Cincinnati. Here's another stat to go along with your case. 6 10-win seasons since 2003. That's as many as the Dallas Cowboys. So it's not like the Bengals is Cincinnati is a pit. I mean, there's a lot worse situations in the NFL than the Bengals. I really agree. In terms, I agree with every word you said in terms of a great situation for Burrow. But, you could argue for all three. Tua doesn't have to play right away. He's got Fitzmagic. I call him Fitzmagic. They call him Fitzpatrick in Miami. The Bengals are an up-younging team. They had a fantastic draft. They acquired a lot of players in the offseason. Tua could sit a year and learn under Fitzpatrick, so I could argue for that. Third, I could argue for Justin Herbert. He can play right away, or he can sit and wait. And he's got, some great people to hand the ball off to, and he's got some great people to throw the ball to. And plus, the Chargers went ahead and added some offensive weapons in the draft. So maybe it's great for all these guys, and maybe all of them will be generational quarterbacks. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you look at it, they are all three in pretty good situations. And you talk about Justin Herbert, Todd, he's from a state nearby in Oregon, so he's automatically going to attract interest to that team. They're obviously moving into a brand new billion-dollar facility in Southern California next season. They've got to sell tickets, and I think Justin Herbert is going to help them do just that. One thing when I thought about Justin Herbert going into this draft, I cannot help but think about previous quarterbacks from Oregon, the Joey Harringtons, Dennis Dixons, Marcus Mariotas, all three really good college quarterbacks, but none have really worked out in the NFL. The book isn't totally written on Mariota, but he's certainly not getting off to an ideal start. Can Justin Herbert be different is the question. And he may be. He's 6'6". He's a lot bigger than all three of those guys. We saw what he did last year at Oregon, Rose Bowl champions. They won the Rose Bowl. So it's going to be interesting. I don't have a feel one way or another. I usually think Pac-12 quarterbacks and quarterbacks from Oregon simply are not going to work out in the NFL. They do not see good competition on defense. And when they get to the NFL, they struggle. If you look at all the USC quarterbacks and a lot of the quarterbacks that do come out of the Pac-12, there's a lot more that struggle than make it. So we'll see what happens with Justin Herbert. I like his size. I like his situation. And for those reasons, he may be able to succeed.
It'll be very interesting. Let's talk about another club in the AFC going from the Chargers to the Colts. I think this was one of the best drafts. They really helped themselves at the quarterback position, not only this season, but possibly next with Phillip Rivers, but also the future with Jacob Eason. The Colts also got Jonathan Taylor at the running back position, wide receivers Michael Pittman and Desmond Patton, who was in the 6th round. Imagine picking up a player that good in the 6th round, plus what the Colts have on that mammoth offensive line. They're going to be a huge player in the AFC. I don't think there's any question they will be. Plus, they've already got Mack at running back. I mean, this is a team that's loaded and ready to contend.
Yeah, Todd, this is a team that has really drafted well over the past 2 or 3 seasons. I forgot the general manager's name in Indianapolis. I know it's Chris. But I forget. Okay, yeah, excellent job as general manager so far, and excellent drafts if you look at the past couple of drafts in Indianapolis. I know you like this team. You like to pick up a Phillip Rivers. I'm not totally sold on Rivers, but I am sold on this draft. I mean, like you said, they've set themselves up for success in the future. I like to pick up a Jonathan Taylor. I think a good 1-2 punch of Taylor and Marlon Mack is going to be a good thing. It's weird though, Todd. Who would have thought, and I know we'll talk about Jake later in this show today, who would have thought Jacob Eason would get drafted ahead of Jake Fromm? But that's what happened. Eason going in the 4th to Indianapolis and Fromm off to Buffalo in the 5th round.
That's right. And, I love Frank Reich. I think he's the next new upcoming coach in the NFL. And as a head coach, we all know what he did as an OC in Philadelphia. Helping the Eagles win the championship. This, to me, could be, I said could be, because you've got the Ravens and another up-and-coming team, I think, is Pittsburgh. When people count them out, they end up being sorely wrong at the end of the season. I think the Colts, the Steelers, the Ravens, I won't say the Browns because they have to prove it to me. Those teams right there, they're going to be the biggest obstacle for Kansas City to get back to the Super Bowl.
Yeah, and you mentioned Frank Reich, Todd. I couldn't agree with you more. Excellent offensive mind, excellent head coach now too in Indianapolis. Frank Reich actually helped turn Nick Foles into a Super Bowl MVP. And obviously Foles had a lot to do with that himself by going out there and performing like he did. But he also fooled my Jaguars into thinking it was a good idea to give Nick Foles $80 million contract about a year ago. So in some ways I like Frank Reich, but in some ways I don't. So excellent, good young situation though in Indianapolis though, Todd. I can see why you like that team. And it's going to be a good race. Tennessee obviously is going to be a force to be reckoned with in that division. Houston has got us all scratching our head lately about what they're doing. But the fact remains they still have a good team in Houston. They're back-to-back division champions. That's going to be an exciting race this next season in the AFC South.
It is, and we forgot to mention Tennessee to give them, some due justice because they're going to be good too. You're right, the AFC South and the AFC North, that's going to be very exciting. Let's go on. You spoke about Jake Fromm. He didn't go till round 5 to the Bills, which, locally we were surprised here. But, can Fromm possibly wrestle that job away from Josh Allen one day?
Well, you never know. We've seen 2 good seasons so far from Josh Allen, but it's only 2. So it's not like he's an established franchise quarterback by any means. So the possibility of that is definitely there. But, it's weird, Todd. The Bills front office said that they didn't even have Jake Fromm on their radar. They didn't think he would be available in the 5th round. And when they found out that, he was still available for them to pick at 5, they said they couldn't pass it up. They're getting a winner. We know the guy. We know him well. We've seen him, what he did in high school in Warner Robins, what he did in Athens, and what we think he's going to do in the pros. I think it's a great pick. I'm surprised he ends up all the way up in Buffalo, but that might actually be a good situation. Like I said, Todd, he's going to be backing up a guy that's not exactly an established franchise quarterback. So it's a good opportunity for Jake, and obviously we want to wish him the best.
I think he's got a shot to be the number 2 guy right away, beating out Matt Barkley, who used to go to USC. So, this is going to be really interesting in terms of, for Jake Fromm. I mean, this really is an opportunity for him down the line. And I've compared him to Brian Greasy a lot. The mannerisms, the calmness, doesn't have the gigantic arm, but he's smart. He can move the chains, and he makes the people around him help him out tremendously. And that could be the same thing in Buffalo as it was for Greasy in Denver and Greasy at the University of Michigan.
Yeah, and that's a good young team in Buffalo. They've got some skill at the wide receiver position. Excellent young running back in Singletary, who played at Florida Atlantic. I see nothing but good things for him. That's a good young team they've got in Buffalo, and obviously contenders now to win the AFC East. Now, when you mentioned Matt Barkley, though, Todd, I can't help but think about that long list of quarterbacks that have come out of USC, and that's why when I talked about Pac-12 quarterbacks a few moments ago with Justin Herbert, when you say Matt Barkley, I can't help but think about Matt Leinart and Sam Darnold and Mark Sanchez, even though his first 2 seasons in the league were remarkable, and then it was all downhill after that.
Very true. Let's stick with players from the University of Georgia because this is Primetime ATL. We are on with Chris Pirtle, who's the host of the Sports Junkies on WAXE 107.9 FM and 1370 AM in Vero Beach, Florida. I really like the move here the Lions made, getting DeAndre Smith in the 2nd round. He's probably the best running back in this class, and they might have finally, and I'll say it again, finally found a guy to become the last star running back the Lions have had since Barry Sanders.
Yeah. It's amazing when you say that, too, because I have to think about it. How long has that been since Barry Sanders has played in the NFL? And it's got to be around 25 years. So it's amazing.
It would have been 1989.
1989? Wow.
But excuse me, I mean 1999. Excuse me. I'm thinking of when I moved here to Georgia, I gave up my Lions season tickets, and what do? They win their only playoff game since 1957, and then go play in the swamp in Washington and get bum rushed, and they don't get to the Super Bowl. But at least they got that far, and they were 12-4 that year. And my heart was broken once again. My timing was impeccable to give up the season tickets, move here, and then boom, they just come short again. But back to the Lions, Chris, with Kerryon Johnson and Bo Scarborough from Alabama, and with Matt Stafford at quarterback, this is an all SEC backfield. And I think, keeping many great backs as you have, you can throw the ball to Kerryon. You can throw the ball to DeAndre Swift, and you can you can also hand off to Bo Scarborough, and you could put some of these guys in the slot if you wanted to, and really wreak havoc on a defense.
Yeah. And before I start on what I've got to say, my Lion history, I know it well too, Todd. I lived in Cincinnati in '92, first year I was there, and that was when they played those Redskins in the NFC title game. And then obviously, like you said, Sanders left in 99. So it's been 21 years since they've had a quality running back. This is kind of weird though, Todd. It takes me back about 365 days. And what happened to the very top of the second round of last year's NFL draft? A Georgia running back fell to the second round, even though we all knew he should have been drafted in the first round. And I'm talking about Nick Chubb. He actually made the draft. Actually, I guess that was 2 seasons ago. He should have been drafted ahead. He should have been the number 1 pick instead of Baker Mayfield because he's played like that. But in any case, yeah, Chubb falls to the top of the second round, and very similar to DeAndre Swift. Swift, obviously, we've seen what he can do, Todd. I think he's going to be a good NFL running back. I had this debate going with an ex-co-host of mine last year, and it's which 2 colleges have produced the best running backs, which 2 colleges have sent the best running backs to the pros. And we came up with those 2 colleges. It's a debate as to which ones actually sent the best ones to the pros, but there is no debate when you look at the top 2 universities in terms of sending running backs to the NFL. It's the University of Georgia and it's the University of Miami. Which order you want to put them in is definitely a serious debate. But getting DeAndre Swift, I think, is a great move for the Lions. I think he will be their running back of the future because he is that darn good. And good draft for the Lions, and we'll see what happens with all these SEC players in the backfield.
Right, getting Jeff Okudah, the 3rd pick from Ohio State, plus the Lions drafted Jackson, another Ohio State lineman, and I graduated from Michigan, and what does my Ohio State buddy call me up? He goes, "Hey, the Lions are Ohio State North now. Congratulations." I thought, man, I feel good, and then you stick a pin right in my back. I appreciate it. So speaking of the Southeastern Conference, they really made it. The conference really made its mark with 63 players drafted, and especially at the early part of the draft, and especially with Alabama and Clemson. Is there really a big gap between the SEC and the rest of college football, in your opinion?
Yes. And for me, it's an easy answer, Todd. If I had to give you the best conferences, I would want to say I'd want to break the conference in half, because the best conferences to me is number 1, the SEC West, number 2, the SEC East, and then I would go with the Big Ten or whoever's next, because they are head and shoulders above the rest, Todd. Going into last season, it was 7 out of the last 13. They won it again. They've won 8 out of the last 14 NCAA championships in football. It's just crazy how much they've dominated the past 20 years. So it was no surprise to me at all, Todd, to see 15 of the first-round picks come from the SEC and 63 overall. My question is, my Jaguars had 2 picks going into the first round. Which 2 players from the SEC were they going to draft? And luckily for me, they didn't disappoint me. They didn't get the guys I wanted, but at least they drafted 2 players from the SEC, and that made me feel a whole lot better about it.
We'll get to your Jags shortly. I think there's a gap. I will say there's a big gap between the SEC and the rest of them, but one conference, and it is the Big Ten. They did have 47 teams. Ohio State had 7 players drafted in the first 2 days, 10 for a total. Michigan had 10 players drafted. Their problem is the talent was on the bottom half of the draft, as 8 of them were in, the 3rd day. And, you still had 5 from Penn State, 5 from Iowa. Minnesota had 5. Wisconsin had 4. I think the Big Ten East is the second best division in college football. I do think it's stronger than the SEC East from top to bottom. I do say the SEC is the best conference in college football. It hurts a little to say that, but I have to admit it. Facts are facts. And the Big Ten is second. I don't know if there's I don't think there's a big gap between the SEC and the Big Ten, but there is a big gap from the SEC from the rest of them. And the Big Ten, to me, is definitely the second best conference, because the 3rd team that had the most players drafted was the Pac-12, and they had 32. So, these 2 conferences are way above the other ones.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, let's look at national championships in just the last 20 years. We're 20 years into this century.
Yeah, that's
yeah,
the
and
part that separates.
There's a huge separation. The SEC with 12, the ACC is second on that list with 3, and that's a lot of that is because Clemson has won 2 out of the last 4. The Big 12 has 2, the Pac-12 only has 1, and the Big 10 only has 2. So there is a massive difference when it comes to national championships.
There is, and I don't know if you can base that on the conference as a whole from top to bottom. I think the elite teams are in the SEC. You obviously Clemson and the Alabamas, but and then Georgia's really good too. It would be interesting if Georgia had to play in the Big Ten East. I would love to see them play Ohio State. I think the Buckeyes should have beat Clemson. They got robbed on some calls, and that's a show for another day, which really hurt their cause in that game. But, I think the Big Ten's a pretty good conference, and it's on its way up. It's not the Big 2 and Little 8 anymore. That's for sure. We got to go on. Let's go to the Falcons here in Atlanta. They got A.J. Terrell at cornerback out of Clemson, and then they drafted defensive tackle Marlon Davidson out of Auburn. Can the Falcons compete with the Saints and the Bucks with their draft? Does that get them where they can actually maybe they can unseat one of them and win the division? Or do you think that's not going to happen?
Well, I think so much is on the shoulders of Matty Ryan. Can he be effective? Can he be efficient? Can he not turn the ball over? So there's so much going to be riding on his play this season. And there's a reason he won the MVP a few years ago. He was the reason they got. Obviously, it's a team that it takes a whole team to do it, but I think so much is going to be riding on Matt Ryan's shoulders. And one last thing I wanted to say about the SEC, I thought it was interesting. I think you'll like this stat too, Todd. Of those 12 national championships the SEC has won in the last 20 years, Nick Saban was the coach on half of them. So
that's right, he was.
5 in Alabama.
That is a great stat. It's
I thought that was interesting. Well, in terms of the Falcons, a lot riding on the shoulders of Matt Ryan. But if you look at the receiving core, you've got Ridley, you've got Julio Jones, you've just brought in Todd Gurley. If Gurley can play and give them something that they didn't think they were going to get out of them, definitely give them something more than what they got from Freeman. They could make some noise. So much riding though on the decision making of Matt Ryan, in my opinion.
Well, sure is. And what do the Bucks do? They get the tackle and Worst from Iowa, the one they got. They help themselves out at the running back position. What do the Saints do? They help themselves out by getting Emmanuel Sanders before the draft. Those two teams, in my opinion, are still above the Falcons. My co-host JJ thinks the Falcons are even behind the Panthers, and I can't go that far. Even though the Panthers had one hell of a draft, they went defense and defense galore because they figure that's the only way they're going to stay in the games. And to me, that's an interesting division. But it's still, for me, it's still Tampa, New Orleans, and I think those two, they're huge Super Bowl contenders.
Yeah, they are. And I'm sure you've seen the video of Tristan Wirfs jumping out of the swimming pool. Did you see that video, Todd?
And
unbelievable.
I couldn't do it if I was pumped up with the best steroids in the world. I still couldn't do it. Wow, that was incredible. I'm glad you brought up that video.
Yeah, 300. That's what I was officially sold on that draft pick when I saw him jump out of the pool. 320 pounds in 4 or 5 feet of water, and he jumps out of the pool onto the concrete. And, I said the other day on my show, Todd, I'm 215 pounds. I have a hard time jumping into the pool. This guy jumped out of the pool. So yes. I was definitely impressed with what I saw.
And he may be Tom Brady's best friend besides Gronkowski in Tampa because he's going to protect him.
I agree.
So we'll go ahead and let's go to one of your favorite subjects, the Jags. The Jags. and you texted me, and I'm gonna read what you texted me. I'm not happy with my Jacksonville Jaguars. They seem to have some kind of disorder or obsession because every other year they draft a Florida Gator defensive player in the first round, and he turns out to be a pure bust. I'll let you give the stats about the Jag players that were a bust that were drafted from Florida, and then talk about the current one that was drafted, and what do you think of him?
Yeah. Again, the Jaguars select a defensive player from the University of Florida. Todd, this is 3 times now in the last 6 years they've done it. It's 4 times in the last 12 years they've done it. The previous 3 gentlemen they've drafted from Florida have all been bust. It started with Derek Harvey back in 2008, I believe. He was a top 10 pick, a pure bust. Then in 2014 with Amari Cooper sitting on the board, and this is about a year after you drafted Blake Bortles. You've got Amari Cooper sitting on the board for you there with that pick at 3, and they draft Dante Fowler, who very rarely started a game in his 4 seasons in Jacksonville. He's actually now on his 3rd team in 3 years. I saw he got a nice contract with Atlanta, which was somewhat puzzling, but hey, more power to him. And then Taven Bryan, 2 seasons ago, drafted with the number 29th pick in the first round. He's been a complete disappearing act his 2 seasons so far in Jacksonville. So I was a little surprised because at some point, Todd, I would imagine if you're the general manager, and they have had the same general manager now for 7 years, so he's responsible for the Dante Fowler and Taven Bryan picks. And I would imagine if you are that same general manager and you have totally struck out on drafting a certain side of the ball from a certain university, that you might say, you know what, I don't think I want to do that anymore. And especially when there's guys like Javon Kinlaw on the board in this year's draft, a defensive tackle from South Carolina, who many were comparing to Marcus Stroud. And I don't have to tell the folks in Georgia about how good of a football player Marcus Stroud was. Not only did he start at UGA, but he helped anchor the Jacksonville defense for about 8 years alongside Big John Henderson, who was a fellow SEC defensive tackle stud. So I thought that was the direction the Jaguars were going to go. They went ahead and drafted C.J. Henderson with that pick, a quarterback, which is another serious need that the Jaguars have. So I understand that. So I just want to say, hopefully things work out, and hopefully Henderson doesn't follow in that long line of first-round defensive bust from the University of Florida drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars.
What is it? Shame me once, shame me twice, shame me 3 times. What the heck? We'll try a 4th. I actually think this one will be the charm. You know, Henderson, he's a big corner. He's got good length. He's really good in man-to-man coverage. And, you know, he's got, I don't know, he's got some kind of speed. I'm looking for the word for it. I don't know, simple speed. He just seems to do things at ease for me. You know, I like this pick for the Jags. And, you know, they did go get a defensive tackle in the 3rd round out of Ohio State named Devin Hamilton, who I think has a chance to be a really good player. And then, of course, they did get K'Lavon Chaisson, the linebacker out of LSU. And then they turned around and got that Chenault kid out of Colorado, wide receiver. So I think the Jags had some really good picks there in their first 4 picks of the draft.
Well, good. I certainly hope it works out. You know, Isaiah Simmons was drafted. Yeah, I'm fresh off a watch. You know, he's been on TV big time the past 2 days. I think Isaiah Thomas has been on ESPN the past 2 days than he has the past 20 years combined. So, excuse me, I still have
Michael
Isaiah.
Jordan.
But in any case, Isaiah Simmons gets drafted right before the Jaguars pick at number 9. He goes off to Arizona with the 8th pick, and Derek Brown was taken by the Panthers 2 picks before their selection. So I think if either one of those guys would have been on the board, the Jaguars might have taken one of them. But I'm hearing great things about Chenault, the wide receiver from Colorado, Todd. The same guy who told me to watch out for Patrick Mahomes after he was drafted by Kansas City a few years ago is the same guy telling me good things about Chenault. I like our chances.
I tell you what, I like that guy. You need to get him in touch with me. This guy knows what he's talking about. So, yes,
sure does.
It'll be very interesting in Jacksonville this season indeed. Okay, Chris, what team or teams put themselves in position to contend now that the draft is over? I want to hear with at least two of them that you have in mind.
Well, I'm going to start with Tampa Bay. I mean, I think they moved up in the draft, so they showed the desire to go up and get the person they thought they needed with that first pick, Tristan Wirf, who I think is going to be, I mean, not only can he jump out of the pool, Todd, but this guy is a beast. I mean, I saw what he did on that offensive line for Iowa, and I think he's really going to, not only help protect Brady, but he's going to make their run offense that much better. And they drafted Keyshawn Vaughn, who is a running back from Vanderbilt that I really like. Ronald Jones won't have to totally carry the load. Ronald Jones was a very high pick a couple of years ago from USC, but I like what they've got there now. They've got some depth at that position. We saw the acquisition of Gronk here recently, so I like what Tampa Bay did. I like what the San Francisco 49ers did. One of the reasons the 49ers made it to the Super Bowl last year was that defensive line. Getting ahead of myself, but that defensive line was tough last year, and they lost one of the key players off that defensive line. So to go out and get Javon Kinlaw, somebody you should be able to plug right in there and not skip a beat, I think that's huge. So I really think that Tampa Bay and San Francisco did well, and I would love to see those two teams play each other in the Super Bowl, Todd, because then we would have Brady versus Gronk.
You know what? You mentioned San Francisco. They also got the offensive tackle they needed from Washington and Williams. To me, that was huge for Garoppolo.
Yeah, that's huge. And we saw how they just, in the NFC title game, they didn't even have to throw the ball. They just pounded the Packers with a run, and then they played tough defense. So there's nothing wrong with their blueprint of success. We saw where it took them last year, and they have some really good football minds in San Francisco, in case anybody didn't notice. I think the 49ers will be just fine.
I love I love this pick, the kid from Arizona at wide receiver. Is his last name, I can't pronounce it, but I know his first name's Brandon out of Arizona, and I've seen his tape. I've seen him play a couple of games. I saw him play against Michigan State. He made a big play against the Spartans. And boy, I tell you, that kid is impressive.
Yeah, I agree. And they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I also like what the Cardinals did too. The Cardinals are acquiring players from ridiculous trades from the Texans, and then they're also drafting good players. So keep an eye on the Arizona Cardinals. I think the Rams are going to start to fall out and fall off. And I think the 49ers and Cardinals are going to be the future of the NFC West.
Don't count out this team. I know the 49ers. I like the pick they made in the 6th round out of Georgia for all your Bulldogs at tight end, Charlie Warner. I think he's got a shot to at least possibly make the club or end up on the practice squad. But to me, the Dallas Cowboys, Jerry Jones' yacht out in the Gulf of Mexico, I know it was there for sure, is where he was out in the Gulf of Mexico, because my friend told me his plane was in Destin, Florida, sitting there, the big Cowboys playing with the star. So his yacht was out in the Gulf. And what do? They're the luckiest team in the world. C.D. Lamb out of Oklahoma dropped to him at number 17. And I bet they couldn't get on the phone. And they didn't even interview him. They didn't even talk to him. And I bet they couldn't get that pick out of their mouth quick enough, Chris.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're happy with the pick, and obviously the Cowboys are. I'm not as happy, Todd. I see a guy like Jerry Jeudy on the board still. If I'm the Dallas Cowboys, I'm drafting Jerry Jeudy. This guy plays in the SEC. He plays the best competition on defense. CeeDee Lamb's not going to get the luxury of playing Baylor twice like Oklahoma did last year. This is the NFL, and it's a totally different ballgame. I'm not as high on CeeDee Lamb as a lot of people, especially when you've got good quality Alabama receivers on the board. Amari Cooper went to Alabama. I would have grabbed another one of those Alabama guys and teamed him up with Amari Cooper. We'll see what happens. I could be wrong about CeeDee Lamb, but we'll have to see what happens.
I tell you, the Dallas draft to me stuck out like a sore thumb in a good way. You got Diggs from Alabama in the second round. You got Gallimore, defensive tackle from Oklahoma in the third round. You got Reggie Robinson out of Tulsa in the fourth round. You got the kid from Wisconsin, the center, to go ahead and replace Frederick Baidez in the fourth round. You went and got Bradley Anae in the fifth round, the defensive end out of Utah. If you haven't seen him play, go turn on his tape. I thought the Cowboys had one of the best drafts. I think they always draft well, but this one to me stuck out. And I think Dallas and Philadelphia are going to be to reckon with in the NFC. I can't count them out. I mean, they're going to be contenders. And, it's interesting. And also the Steelers, they never even had a first-round pick. Of course, their first-round pick was the cornerback they traded for. Why am I forgetting his name right now? You probably know it. You're an encyclopedia. Who's the kid that they got? They traded for a first-round pick. Who was that for the Steelers?
Mika Fitzpatrick.
Thank you. I knew you'd come up with it. Mika Fitzpatrick. They turned around and got Chase Claypool out of Alabama. In the second round. What did they do? They turn around and get Alex Highsmith out of Charlotte. If you've ever seen his tape, the outside linebacker, man, this kid's going to play for Pittsburgh. There's no doubt about it. They got the speedster Anthony McFarland out of Maryland. I'm impressed with Pittsburgh's draft. Let's talk about one you did not mention, who I think maybe has the best draft of all of them, the Ravens. I was surprised you didn't mention them. What did you think of their draft?
They're up there at the top. There's no doubt about it. They've, that's another team that has really drafted well over the past couple of years. So what's going on in the front office, definitely going well for the Ravens and Pittsburgh too. That's another team you just mentioned. Those teams traditionally seem to draft well, but I thought the Ravens definitely in the top 5 of the draft. They're going to go out and they get the running back from Ohio State. I guess when Mark Ingram is approaching the age he is, it's probably not a bad idea to bring in another running back, and should be a pretty good 1-2 punch.
I mean, I look at the Ravens, and I think it is the best draft. Patrick Queen, the linebacker at LSU. Like you said, J.K. Dobbins, who's right there with anybody. They got the kid out of Texas A&M at the defensive tackle position, Matt Buke. Malik Harrison out of Ohio State, an inside linebacker. I mean, top to bottom, they got Geno Stone out of Iowa in the 7th round. I just think from top to bottom, they may have had the best draft.
Yeah, so, they may, and they're gonna, they shouldn't have any problem being right back in the playoffs, Todd. The Ravens with Lamar Jackson, 14-2 at quarterback. The previous year, I believe he was 6-1. So he was 20-3 as a starter in the regular season, but 0-2 in the playoffs. The Ravens are going to have to prove themselves next year in the playoffs if they can get back there.
Not only is the NFC loaded, but the AFC is stacked at the top too. It's going to be very interesting. One last question, and this was fun, and then I'll let you go. I really appreciate you coming on with me. You're listening to Chris Pirtle, WAXE 107.9 FM out of Vero Beach, Florida, also an NBA insider. This one's fun. Do you like this year's quarantine draft scene better than the regular draft? And should they do this format from now on?
I wouldn't mind. I like both, I should say. I like what they did last year in Nashville. That was pretty cool setting. But this year, Todd, I was just so happy to have anything, to be able to watch on TV in terms of sports that's actually taking place right now, even though it's not an event. It's the NFL draft. So this was my favorite NFL draft of all time, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in that boat.
How many millions saw the draft? It was a record, and it was my favorite draft of all time too. And I really liked the part I liked the most is you were in the homes of the players. You got to see the players and their entire families, not just in the first round, but in the seventh round. The emotion. The kid that got drafted out of Notre Dame from Chicago, got drafted by his hometown Bears. I mean, my goodness. And, Roger Goodell, it would have been kind of cool if he wasn't in his basement, that he was someplace better. Maybe he should have been someplace exotic or on a yacht like Jerry Jones. But, I love seeing the head coach of the Cardinals. I love seeing his crib. Holy smokes, man. I mean, did you see that thing?
Yeah, I did. And I agree with you too, Todd. Seeing the raw emotions of the kids, and seeing Joe Burrow sitting there with his parents, on the couch. I like that, actually. So if I have to give you an answer, I like what we saw a few nights ago. I would like for them to keep it that way. I'd rather see that, the raw emotions, the kids sitting there with their families, their parents, instead of these fake chest bumps with Roger Goodell on a stage somewhere. And Roger Goodell, I agree. Get out of the basement. Go to your living room. We already know you're rich. We already know your living room probably looks just unbelievable. So get out of the basement. Go upstairs to the living room. It's going to be okay. We already know you're filthy rich. And, keep it the way it is, though, Todd. I like the more you talk about it and describe it, I like the raw emotion that we saw in this year's NFL draft.
The only thing missing to me was for Cliff Kingsbury to come out and show his yard, and for Jerry Jones to go out and just do it from the outside part of the yacht so we could see the sun go down and the golfer at least see what's going on out in the Gulf, where they could view the pictures and everything. I mean, that to me would have been really cool. But Chris, it was really a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for coming on ATL Prime Sports today. And you guys go check out his show, The Sports Junkies. Chris, I'll let you advertise it, and then I'll let you go.
Yeah, feel free to listen. We'll be on this Friday from 11 to 12. That's 11 a.m. till noon on WAXE. We are on iHeartRadio, so if you want to check us out on iHeart, just type in WAXE in your search bar, FM 107.9 and AM 1370. Todd, always a pleasure to be with you and everyone on Primetime in the ATL. You guys have a great one up there, and I'll be in touch.
Take care. You take care of yourself. God bless you and your family. Have a great day. That's Chris Pirtle of WAXE 107.9 FM out of Vero Beach, Florida. Check it out, The Sports Junkies, every Friday from 11 to 12 p.m. Well, that's the end of our show here on ATL Prime Sports. Thank you for listening. And I'll let you know what's going on the rest of the week before I let you go. Tomorrow from 8 to 9:15 p.m. We definitely already have a guest at 8:40 p.m. It's going to be former Major League Baseball player Jack Voigt. Join him. We're also in the process of scheduling Dave Cohen, the voice of the Georgia State Panthers. We'll see if he can come on the show. I will do that shortly. Thursday, I'll have Deshaun Tate, our NCAA college basketball insider. He is going to talk to me about the Detroit Pistons bad boys versus the Bulls. Bill Laimbeer, Isaiah Thomas, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, The Last Dance. We're going to talk about that. And I'll let you know ahead next Tuesday, May 5th, former San Francisco Giants player Dante Fowler, who played with Barry Bonds and Jeff Kent. Thank you all for listening today. I'm Todd Corder. For Breck out in San Francisco, I'm here in Atlanta. Thank you, and have a great day. Good evening, everyone.